went home and wound up in Philadelphia Naval Hospital. And they says to me, come on, Frank, take a discharge, go home with our blessings, you've done your share. I says, I'm a sonar man. I sit on a three-legged stool and turn a knob and listen for submarines. I said, I can do that. And the next day, and then I tell them I don't want the discharge. Eventually, I got discharged from the hospital. Well, now they figured, since during the war, time come on and had gone on, and they come up with better sonar and stuff like that. So they wanted to send me back for a refresher course to find out the new stuff that was done and everything else, and also to give me more time to heal. So they sent me back down to Key West, Florida. So when I got to Key West, Florida, I had to take the refresher course in sonar, which originally we could always tell you what the direction was on the submarine, but we didn't know how deep it was. The British had a method of determining how deep it was, and so we incorporated that, plus a few other little things in there, and I took the course, and again I finished first in my class, and now they says, well, while you're here, why don't you take the sonar and radar material course. The material is how to repair sonar and radar. Basically, we were not going to be experts. What we would be able to do is with instruments determine what the problem is, and we had new units. You could take the old unit out and put the new one in, so it wasn't like you had to be an expert. But 2 people in our class had worked for Boston Submarine Signal Company that designed and built all our equipment. And one of the things we had to do in this course on repair of sonar and radar, you had to build a radio, you had to do soldering and all kinds of things like this, which I had never done, but I still finished 3rd in the class. The 2 guys invented this system finished 1, 2. But anyway, while I was taking this course, we had a little instructor, he looked like Pedroia of Red Sox, a little guy, but he was a firebrand, you know, and he was really gung-ho. And I used to kid around a little. One day he says, everybody take out a sheet of paper, and I raised my hand. He says, what do you want? I says, how big a sheet? He said, about 8.5 by 11. I said, that's a lot of sheet. He said, Lombardo, you don't know there's a war on. You're not taking this war seriously. He didn't have any idea about anything, you know, and I just sort of laughed about it. So a couple of days later, they decided that everybody on the base had to get out on the parade, not on parade ground, but on the field, and participate in some event. You could be in a rope pull. You could run around a track or something like that. Different things, wrestle, a box, but you had to do at least one thing. So I waited around and waited around. My hands were still very tender. My skin was bad. I couldn't do any boxing or wrestling or I couldn't put a rope pull. It would take the skin right off me. So I was waiting, and he come over to me and he says, you know, I've been watching you, Lombardo. You haven't got in. I said, how many did we have to be in? He says, you got to be in at least one. I says, don't sweat. A few minutes later, they called for a 100-yard dash. Now, what they had is a tree. It was maybe from here to the golf course away, and you had to run up around the oak tree and come back. And they had about 7 or 8 of us got in line. By the time we got to the driveway down here, there was 2 of us. And when we got back, we were nose to nose. And this guy turned around to me, he says, I was a champ in school, in college. He says, where the hell did you run? I said, I just got out of the hospital. But anyway, a couple days later, they made an announcement. They says, everybody on the base, get into your dress whites and on the parade ground. I'm thinking, oh Christ, another inspection. So I'm standing out there, and while my hands are hanging down, there was very little skin covering my veins, and I dress whites, and here the blue veins of the ends, it looked like I hadn't washed in a week. And I'm thinking, a goddamn inspection, and here they come straight down at me, all the brass. You know, they had about 10 officers, all brass, and they stopped and pinned a Purple Heart on me. Well, this Pedroia, he come over crying. He says, I didn't know. I says, so what? You know, life goes on. Yeah, I survived, life goes on. So we go down to Panama, go through the canal, and we go into Hawaii. While we're there in Hawaii, we stopped off in Maui, And here I ran into a guy who I had met at the hospital back when I was in the hospital in Oran. And he had been a motor machinist, and here he is busted down to a seaman. And I says, how did that happen? He says, you know, he said, I had this engineering officer. And he said he was always on my case. He was making a fool of me every chance he could. So one day he said one thing too much and I broke his nose.
Oh.
He said, so they busted me. He says, but that guy's going to remember that broken nose for the rest of his life. I said, well, what was your defense? How come you didn't get put in jail and everything? He said, I told him that he insulted my mother. I said, what do you mean he insulted you? He said, he called me a son of a bitch. And he said, that was enough to keep me from getting shot. But he did lose his stripes. He said, I'll get the stripes back. But he said, that guy's going to remember that for the rest of his life. But anyway, here he is at Maui. And he come aboard our ship just for a visit. And I knew him. And I said, what are you doing here? He says, I'm a frogman. I said, what? He said, I'm a frogman. I said, you were an engineer. He says, no, he said, I figured I'd do this. I says, tell me something. I says, how do you get to be a frogman? He says, first of all, you've got to volunteer. You've got to walk in the office and say, I want to be a frogman. And they don't even ask you your name. They said, put this vest on. It's 50 pounds of loaded stuff. Go out there and swim 1 mile right now with the vest on, or we don't even want to talk to you. I said, and you did that? He said, piece of cake. He said, it was nothing. He said, he swam all his life. He says, heck, I could do that all day. But this is how they get you into that. And then after that, and this is, it could be ice water. You're out there, and you have to put up with all that. You got to dive under ships to plant bombs and stuff like that. So that was his little thing. Okay, first he got busted for breaking a nose and all that. But anyway, now we go down to Okinawa. Okay, we're out in the South Pacific. The first duty we had was submarine patrol off Okinawa, and there were 4 locations around the island. Priority 1 was right between Ishima, which was a little atoll where Ernie Pyle, by the way, was killed. He had retired. He figured, nah, I belong out there. He went back there, stuck his head out of a foxhole one night and got it between the eyes. So that's where he was killed. And anyway, here we are off that little island. There's a little channel there. That was priority 1. Every night for 3 nights in a row, every ship there was kamikaze and sunk. They were all ships like our size. And we started in priority 4. We moved to 3, to 2, and finally it was our turn to be in the bucket. Okay? So that's a story in itself about in the bucket, but I won't tell you in this company. But anyway, so here we are. Now we know we're going to get kamikaze. And the moon was so bright you could read by it. All of a sudden I look and there's an eclipse of the moon starting. Before long it was total pitch darkness. It's like walking into a room that you don't have any lights. Couldn't see a thing. During that time we picked up this kamikaze that was flying low looking for us, because when they leave Japan they can't go back. They don't have enough fuel to go back. That's it. They know they're going to die. So he's flying low trying to find us in the eclipse, and he couldn't see us. We picked him up at 15 miles out, which I have the full report showing all this. 15 miles out we picked him up, and as he got closer, he got to 3 miles out. He was flying so low he was under our radar. Our radar was on top of the mast, and he was under our radar, so we lost him on radar. But by this time we had been tracking him, and we knew which way he was going. And when he got within 1,000 yards, which is a half a nautical mile is like 1,000 yards, because 2,000 yards is a full mile. But anyway, when he got that close, we spotted him. And as he got closer, we peppered him with everything we had, 40 millimeter pom-poms and 20 millimeter, like a woodpecker, you know, and we knocked him down. I figured, well, that's all right for tonight. What the hell's going to save me tomorrow night? Captain woke us up 2 hours later. This was 11:30 at night. He woke us up on the loudspeaker. He said, the Navy's abandoning this search area. We're out of here. I did not see another shot fired in World War II.